The Forgotten Carol. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. The lights, the music, the warmth of family gathered around the fire. It all felt like a slice of magic. But that year, Christmas felt different. My parents were traveling, my friends were busy, and I had no plans. So when my Aunt Caroline invited me to spend the holidays at her cabin in Maine, I accepted. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being alone. The cabin was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. As I arrived on Christmas Eve, the setting sun bathed the forest in a pale orange glow, the snow crunching under my boots as I carried my bags to the door. Aunt Caroline greeted me with a warm smile, her silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. "I'm so glad you're here, Emma," she said, pulling me into a hug. "It's been too long." The cabin was charming and rustic, its wooden beams adorned with garlands and twinkling lights. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of freshly baked gingerbread filled the air. It felt cozy safe. After dinner, Aunt Caroline pulled out an old box of Christmas decorations. "These belong to my grandmother," she said, lifting out a set of faded ornaments. "And her grandmother before that. They've been in the family for generations." Among the decorations was a sheet of yellowed paper, its edges brittle with age. "What's this?" I asked, unfolding it carefully. "It's an old carol," Aunt Caroline said. "We call it the Midnight Hymn. It's a family tradition to sing it on Christmas Eve." The words were handwritten in looping cursive. "On Christmas night, when bells do chime, the restless walk between the time. With fire bright and circle tight, we sing to ward away the night." Something about the hymn unsettled me. The words felt off, like they didn't belong to the warm, cheerful spirit of the season. "Why do we sing it?" I asked. "To keep the spirits at bay," she said with a faint smile. "It's just an old superstition, but it doesn't hurt to follow tradition." We sang the hymn that night, our voices mingling with the crackle of the fire. Aunt Caroline's voice was steady, almost reverent, while mine faltered over the strange, archaic words. When the song ended, she added, almost as an afterthought, "And remember, Emma, no matter what happens, stay inside after midnight." I thought she was joking, but her tone made my chest tighten. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance along the walls. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke with a start to the sound of faint music. It was a melody, soft and slow, drifting through the trees. I checked the clock. It was 12:15 a.m. Confused, I got out of bed and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. The music continued, growing louder. It wasn't coming from the cabin, it was outside. Curiosity got the better of me. Ignoring Aunt Caroline's warning, I pulled on my boots and coat and stepped out into the freezing night. The forest was eerily quiet, the snow glistening under the light of the full moon. The music led me deeper into the woods, its haunting tune winding through the trees like a thread. It sounded like a choir, but the voices were strange, high and sharp, almost otherworldly. When I reached a clearing, I stopped. At the center of the clearing stood a figure. It was tall and thin, draped in tattered white robes that shimmered like frost. Its face was hidden by a hood, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and unyielding. Around it were others, more figures, pale and faceless, swaying to the rhythm of the music. I should have run. I should have screamed, but I couldn't move. The hooded figure raised a hand, and the music stopped. "Emma," it said, its voice echoing like the toll of a distant bell. "You have broken the circle." My breath hitched. "I didn't mean to," I stammered. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "The hymn is sacred. It binds us, keeps us away. But you," it tilted its head. "You opened the way." I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you want?" It didn't answer. Instead, the others began to hum, a low, mournful sound that made the air around me vibrate. The figure reached out, its hand skeletal and cold as it brushed my cheek. "You will sing for us," it whispered. Before I could react, the figures surrounded me, their voices rising in a cacophony of sound. My vision blurred, and the world tilted. When I woke, I was back in the cabin, lying on the floor near the fireplace. Aunt Caroline was kneeling beside me, her face pale and drawn. "You went outside," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard music," I whispered. "There were things in the woods." She nodded grimly. "I told you to stay inside. The midnight hymn keeps them away, but if you leave the circle, they'll find you." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "They're the forgotten," she said. "Spirits trapped between worlds, drawn to the living during the longest night. The hymn wards them off, but only if you respect the rules. I shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around me. What happens now? Aunt Caroline didn't answer. The rest of Christmas Day was a blur. I tried to focus on the tree, the presents, the warmth of the fire, but I couldn't shake the memory of the figures in the clearing. That night, we sang the hymn again. This time, Aunt Caroline insisted we sing it 3 times, her voice shaking with urgency. But as the hours passed, the cabin grew colder. The fire wouldn't stay lit, and the wind outside carried strange whispers. At midnight, the knocking began. It was soft at first, just a faint tap at the door. Then it grew louder, more insistent, spreading to the windows and walls. "They're here," Aunt Caroline said, her face ashen. "Whatever you do, don't answer." The whispers outside grew into a chorus, voices calling my name, begging to be let in. Some were familiar, my mother, my best friend from childhood, while others were strangers, their tones melodic and hypnotic. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices burrowed into my mind. "Emma, come sing with us." The windows rattled, and the door creaked as if under great pressure. Aunt Caroline began to pray, her words barely audible over the noise. And then, as quickly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence was worse. I turned to Aunt Caroline, but she was staring at the door, her eyes wide with fear. "Emma," she whispered. "Don't look." But it was too late. The door swung open, and the hooded figure stepped inside. Its hollow gaze met mine, and the world went cold. "You broke the circle," it said, its voice a mournful dirge. "Now you belong to us." The last thing I remember is the sound of the hymn, twisted and discordant, as the world faded to black. I woke up weeks later in a hospital bed. They told me Aunt Caroline was gone, the cabin buried in snow. But every Christmas since, I hear it, the midnight hymn, faint and haunting, calling me back to the woods. The red sack. I used to love Christmas, the joy, the laughter, the feeling that for just one night, everything in the world was bright and warm. That was before last year, before I saw the man with the red sack. Now, the season feels more like a nightmare I can't escape. It all started when I decided to spend Christmas Eve with my cousin Daniel and his girlfriend, Erica. They'd recently bought an old farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town, and they insisted I join them for the holidays. "Come on, Sarah," Daniel had said over the phone. "It'll be great. The house has so much charm, and Erica's been decorating it all week. Besides, we'll have plenty of eggnog." I didn't need much convincing. I was tired of spending Christmas alone in my tiny apartment. The drive out to the farmhouse was long, the winding roads slick with ice. By the time I arrived, night had already fallen. The house stood at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by bare trees that cast long, skeletal shadows under the moonlight. Daniel and Erica greeted me at the door, their faces flushed from the cold. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, and the living room glowed with the soft light of a Christmas tree. It felt cozy, welcoming, like the perfect place to spend Christmas. We had a great evening, laughing, eating, and exchanging small gifts. But around 11 p.m., Erica started acting strange. She kept glancing out the window, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I asked, noticing her unease. "Nothing," she said quickly, but her eyes betrayed her. Daniel frowned. "Come on, Erica. Tell her." She hesitated, then sighed. "It's silly, but there's this old story people around here tell. About a man who comes out on Christmas Eve." "What kind of man?" I asked, intrigued. "They call him Red Sack Jack," she said quietly. "He's like a twisted version of Santa Claus. The legend says he shows up in small towns, looking for people who've been bad. But instead of giving them coal, he drags them away in his sack." Daniel rolled his eyes. "It's just a ghost story. Something people made up to scare kids into behaving." "Still," Erica said, crossing her arms, "I've heard too many weird things around here to completely dismiss it. Some folks swear they've seen him." The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I laughed it off. "Well, I've been good this year, so I think I'm safe." Erica didn't smile. A little after midnight, Daniel suggested we all turn in for the night. My room was on the second floor, with a window overlooking the snowy yard. I fell asleep quickly, the warmth of the blankets lulling me into a dreamless sleep. I woke to a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I lay still, listening, I realized it was something else. A scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I got out of bed and crept to the window. The yard below was lit by the moon, and at first I didn't see anything. But then, at the edge of the woods, I spotted him. A man in a tattered red suit, dragging an enormous sack behind him. My breath caught in my throat. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching through the snow. The sack he carried bulged and shifted unnaturally, as if something inside it was struggling to get out. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. I rushed to Daniel and Erica's room, banging on the door until they answered. "What is it?" Daniel asked, groggy and annoyed. "There's someone outside," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "A man with a sack." Erica's face paled. "The legend." "Stop," Daniel said firmly. "It's probably just some guy passing through." "No one just passes through out here," Erica said, her voice trembling. We all went downstairs, Daniel grabbing a flashlight and a baseball bat. Erica stayed by the door while we stepped onto the porch. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the old house settling. "See? No one's out here," Daniel said, shining the flashlight over the yard. But as he spoke, the light landed on something in the snow. Footprints. They were large and deep, leading from the woods to the side of the house. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered. Then we heard it. A low, rumbling laugh coming from somewhere behind us. We spun around, but there was no one there. "Get inside," Daniel said, his voice tight. We bolted back into the house, locking the door behind us. Erica was pale, clutching her phone. "I tried calling the police," she said, "but the line's dead." Before we could respond, there was a loud thud on the roof. All three of us froze, staring at the ceiling. The sound came again, heavier this time, like something, or someone was walking above us. "Attic," Daniel whispered. "No way," I said. "We're not going up there." But then the footsteps stopped, replaced by a new sound, a scratching, like nails dragging across wood. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Come on." We climbed the stairs to the attic, the air growing colder with every step. At the top, Daniel hesitated before pushing open the door. The attic was empty, save for old furniture and boxes. But near the far wall, something glinted in the flashlight's beam. A red sack. It sat upright, as if waiting. "Don't touch it," Erica whispered. But Daniel, always the skeptic, approached it slowly. "Daniel, stop," I pleaded. He reached out to open the sack, and as soon as he did, the attic light flickered and went out. The sack's contents spilled onto the floor, but it wasn't toys or coal. It was bones, small, broken, and yellowed with age. Before we could react, the door slammed shut behind us. The laugh came again, louder this time, echoing around the attic. "Who's there?" Daniel shouted, swinging the flashlight wildly. In the corner, the shadows shifted, and the man in the red suit stepped forward. His face was pale and stretched, his eyes black pits that seemed to devour the light. "You've been very naughty," he said, his voice like gravel. We backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The man raised his sack, which now seemed to move on its own, the fabric writhing as if alive. "Please," Erica whispered. "Don't." But he didn't stop. The sack lunged forward, enveloping her in one swift motion. Her scream was muffled as the sack twisted and shrank, pulling her inside. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing my hand. We bolted down the stairs, the sound of the man's laugh chasing us. We didn't stop until we were outside, the cold air burning my lungs. We reached my car and sped away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. We never saw Erica again. The police found no trace of her, and the sack was gone when they searched the attic. Now, every Christmas, I hear that laugh in my dreams, and I wonder, is he still out there, dragging his sack through the snow, waiting for his next victim?